Howdy, folks, and pull up a seat here at Grit and Gunsmoke. The dessert has a way of stripping a person down to their barest essentials: grit, water, and wool. And sometimes, when everything else is burned away by loss, the wool becomes a weapon sharper than any Bowie knife. Before we follow one such woman back into the crucible that forged her, do this old storyteller a favor: rustle up that subscribe button and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the storm that's gathering. Now, listen close. This is the story of Coyote's Rest, and the quiet, avenging angel who returned to haunt it. Her name was Clara Gray. The woman who rode into Coyote's Rest arrived on the evening wind, a solitary figure moving through a landscape of heat haze and skeletal cigarros. She was a study in quiet contrasts. She was slim, almost frail-looking in the saddle of her tough Mustang, yet she rode with an unyielding posture that spoke of a core of iron. Her long, dark hair was tied back in a practical braid, and her face, though young, was etched with a profound and weary stillness. But it was her eyes that held the desert's own unforgiving clarity, a startling, ice blue that seemed to reflect the vast, empty sky and hold none of its warmth. In a worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder were the tools of a nurse. In a simple, unadorned holster on her hip was a Colt 1873 Peacemaker. She was a healer, and she was a killer. She was a ghost. Her name was Clara Gray, and this desiccated purgatory of a town was once her home. 5 years ago, Coyote's Rest had been a different place. A small, struggling but decent town where her father ran the general store and her brother worked their small patch of land. It was a life of simple, hard-won peace. That peace had been shattered by the arrival of the Vulture's talons. They were not common outlaws, they were a plague. Led by a man named Marcus Thorne, they had seized control of the town's precious few wells and had begun a brutal reign of terror, their main business the smuggling of opium across the nearby border. Clara's family had been among the few who dared to speak out. Her father had refused to sell them supplies. Her brother had tried to organize the other ranchers. The Vulture's response had been swift and absolute. They had burned the store to the ground with her father inside and had hanged her brother from the lone cottonwood tree in the town square, leaving his body to swing in the wind as a warning. Clara had been away, serving as a contract nurse for the Union Army in the last of the brutal frontier campaigns. She had learned of her family's destruction from a cold, terse letter. By the time she returned, there was nothing left but ashes, a shallow grave, and a town suffocating under a blanket of fear. She had not stayed. She had vanished, swallowed by the same desert that had swallowed her family's dreams. Now, she was back. The 5 years in the wilderness, patching up bullet wounds in dusty army camps and learning the harsh lessons of survival from Apache scouts, had burned away the gentle girl she had been. She had learned how to read the land, how to move without a sound, how to kill without hesitation. She was no longer a victim. She was a reckoning. She rode down the single, dusty street of Coyote's Rest. The town was a husk of what she remembered, its soul hollowed out. The Vulture's talons were everywhere, their emblem of vulture's claw clutching a poppy flower painted on the doors of the saloon and the sheriff's office. Fear was a physical presence, a taste of dust and despair in the air. She dismounted in front of the livery stable, her movements deliberate and calm. An old, one-eyed man hobbled out, his face a mask of weary resignation. "A stall and water for my horse," Clara said, her voice a low, quiet melody that seemed out of place in the harsh landscape. The old man squinted at her, his one good eye taking in the Colt on her hip and the profound, chilling stillness in her ice-blue eyes. "Just passin' through, ma'am?" he asked, his voice a cautious whisper. "I've come home," Clara replied, and the simple words seemed to hang in the air with the weight of a prophecy. She did not seek out the law. She knew it was a bought and paid-for commodity. She did not go to the saloon to make a grand statement. Her war would not be fought with loud declarations. It would be fought in the shadows, with whispers and the slow, creeping poison of fear. She took a room in the town's dilapidated boarding house, a small, anonymous room that looked out over the town square. From her window, she could see the cottonwood tree where her brother had died. It was a constant, silent reminder of her purpose. For a week, she did nothing but watch and listen. She was a ghost in her own town, her face, now leaner and harder, and recognized by the few who remained from her past. She moved through the town, a quiet, unassuming figure, her medical bag a perfect disguise. She treated a sick child here, a miner with a broken hand there. Her gentle nurse's touch a perfect camouflage for the iron will beneath. She was gathering intelligence, mapping the enemy's world. She learned the names of the key players. There was Marcus Thorne, the leader, a man who affected the air of a sophisticated businessman but whose eyes held the cold, dead light of a predator. There was his enforcer, a brutal man named Haas who ran the town's day-to-day intimidation. And there was the corrupt sheriff, a man named Brody, who had stood by and watched as her family was destroyed. She also identified the cracks in their armor, the whispers of dissent among the terrorized townspeople. There was the old liveryman Elias, who had known her father. There was the young priest at the town's small, struggling mission. And there was a fiery, red-haired woman named Maeve who ran the saloon but hated the vultures who were her best customers. They were isolated sparks of defiance in a sea of darkness. Clara knew they were her potential army. Her first move was not a violent one. It was an act of quiet, surgical rebellion, designed to send a message that was both terrifying and deeply personal. One of the vulture's lieutenants, a man known for his exceptional cruelty, kept a prized, pure black stallion, a horse he had stolen and beaten into submission. It was the symbol of his power and arrogance. One night, Clara slipped into the vulture's corral. She was a phantom, moving with the skills the Apache had taught her. She did not harm the horse. She did not steal it. She used a mixture of herbs and a gentle, patient touch to soothe the terrified, abused animal. She opened the gate and simply set it free. The next morning, the town awoke to a strange sight. The lieutenant's prized stallion was gone, vanished without a trace. The only thing left in its empty stall was a single, perfectly formed poppy flower, laid carefully on the packed earth. It was a quiet act, a bloodless one, but the message was clear and chilling. A ghost was walking in Coyote's Rest. A ghost who could get past their guards, who could walk among their most prized possessions, who could touch them whenever they wanted. And this ghost's calling card was the very symbol of their own corrupt enterprise. The vengeance of Clara Gray would not be a loud, roaring fire. It would be a whisper in the night, a shadow that never fades, a slow, creeping, and utterly inescapable reckoning. Clara Gray's vengeance did not begin with the roar of a gunshot, but with the insidious, creeping silence of a desert predator. She understood that to attack the vulture's talons head-on would be suicide. They were a pack of wolves, strong in their numbers and their brutality. To defeat them, she had to become a different kind of hunter. She had to become a disease, a quiet, internal sickness that would rot the gang from the inside out. Her whispering campaign, as she thought of it, began with the one tool she possessed that they could not understand, her knowledge of medicine and the subtle, potent pharmacopoeia of the desert. Her first target was not a man, but the gang's morale. The Gilded Poppy Saloon was the heart of their empire, the place where they swaggered, drank, and projected their aura of invincible power. Clara decided to turn their sanctuary into a place of humiliation. She had learned from her time with the Apache of a specific, non-lethal dessert root. When dried and powdered, it was tasteless and odorless, but when ingested with alcohol, it acted as a powerful, and deeply unpleasant, purgative. On a moonless night, she moved with the ghostly silence she had perfected. The saloon's back storeroom, where they kept the whiskey barrels, was secured by a simple padlock. For the tools in her medical bag, a set of fine, steel probes and picks designed for delicate surgical work, it was a trivial obstacle. She slipped inside, a shadow among shadows. She did not poison the entire supply. That would be too obvious. Instead, she chose a single barrel, the one currently being tapped for the bar, and added a carefully measured dose of the powdered root. The next night, the Gilded Poppy Saloon, usually a place of boisterous, drunken noise, became a theater of the absurd. One by one, the vultures who were drinking their usual whiskey were struck down by a sudden, violent, and deeply embarrassing intestinal revolt. Haas, the brutal enforcer, was reduced to a pale, sweating wreck, his threats replaced by desperate, groaning sprints to the outhouse. The scene was one of chaotic, comical misery. The townspeople watched, at first with fear, then with a dawning. The invincible vultures were suddenly, inexplicably, mortal. They were sick, they were weak, and they were, for the first time, a laughingstock. The rumor spread through the town like a prairie fire. The vultures had been struck down by a stomach curse, a strange and targeted affliction. While the seeds of ridicule were being sown, Clara began to plant the seeds of trust. She was a ghost to the outlaws, but to the townspeople, she became a quiet, reassuring presence. She used her medical bag not as a disguise, but for its intended purpose. She treated the blacksmith's son for a fever, her cool hands and calm demeanor a balm in the fearful household. She set the broken arm of a miner who had been accidentally shoved by one of the vultures, her work swift and professional. She asked for no payment, only for quiet conversation. And in these quiet moments, she listened. She learned the names of the families who had suffered the most. She identified the handful of individuals whose fear was outweighed by a deep, simmering anger. These were her potential allies. She approached them not as a leader recruiting soldiers, but as a fellow survivor offering a sliver of hope. Her first true conversation was with Elias, the one-eyed liveryman. She found him late one night, grimly repairing a fence the vultures had kicked in for sport. "They told me you were dead, Clara," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, not looking up from his work. He was one of the few who remembered her from before. "I'm glad they were wrong. Being dead has its advantages," she replied quietly. "It lets you see things others miss." "I see a storm coming," he grunted. "I am the storm," she said, and there was no boast in her words, only a simple, cold statement of fact. She did not ask for his help directly. She simply told him, "The vultures are moving a shipment of opium on the southern trail in 2 nights. A small one. 3 riders." She had gleaned this information from a vulture whose loose tongue had been lubricated by the saloon's now infamous whiskey. She turned and walked away, leaving the information hanging in the air. It was a test of trust. 2 nights later, the vulture's small opium shipment did not make it through. It was met not by a gunfight, but by a freak rock slide on the southern trail, a rock slide that sent their pack mules and their precious cargo tumbling into a deep, inaccessible ravine. It was, of course, a rock slide that had been helped along by a carefully placed pry bar in the hands of a determined, one-eyed liveryman. Elias had made his choice. Her next meeting was with Maeve, the fiery, red-haired woman who ran the saloon. Maeve was a prisoner in her own establishment, forced to serve the men she despised. Clara found her dumping trash in the back alley, her face a mask of cold fury. "They treat you like property," Clara said, her voice a soft whisper from the shadows. "We're all their property," Maeve spat back, not startled, but weary. "Property can be stolen back," Clara replied. "You hear things. You see things. Who comes? Who goes? Who says too much when they've had too much to drink? Information is a weapon, Maeve. A better weapon than any gun." She didn't need to say more. She saw the spark of rebellion ignite in the saloon owner's eyes. Her final visit was to the town's small, struggling mission, to Father Michael. He was a young priest, his faith tested daily by the evil that had taken root in his parish. She found him tending the small, withered garden behind the church. "I am not asking you to break your vows, Father," she said, her presence quiet and respectful. "I am asking you to uphold them. These people need a sanctuary, a place where they can speak without fear, a place where the sick can be tended when they are too afraid to go to a vulture's own doctor." Father Michael looked at this strange, intense young woman, a healer who carried a gun, an angel of vengeance with the eyes of a saint. "The doors of God's house are always open to the afflicted," he said, and in his words, Clara heard the promise of a safe house, a base of operations. The whispering campaign was working. The vultures were sick. Their operations were being disrupted, and their enemies were beginning to find each other in the shadows. Clara Gray had not fired a single lethal shot, but her silent, invisible war had been successfully declared. The disease was spreading. The psychological wounds Clara had inflicted on the vulture's talons were beginning to fester. The gang was on edge, their humiliation in the saloon and the mysterious disruptions to their smuggling runs turning their arrogance into a brittle, dangerous paranoia. They began to lash out, their casual cruelty escalating as they sought to reassert their dominance through brute force. Their primary target, as it had always been, was the small, vulnerable community of Apache who lived on the reservation land bordering the territory, a people they treated as less than human. The leader of these brutal excursions was a man named Reno, a sadistic lieutenant of Thorns who took a special, perverse pleasure in tormenting the native population. He was not the smartest or the fastest of the vultures, but he was, by far, the most cruel. For Clara, who had learned so much of her own survival skills from Apache scouts during her time with the army, this was an offense that demanded a more permanent solution. It was time for her whispering campaign to find its first, lethal voice. Her objective was not just to kill Reno, it was to make his death a message, a piece of terrifying theater that would speak directly to the superstitions and fears of his fellow thugs. She would not use a bullet from a hidden ridge. She would use the desert's own venom. From Lev, her eyes and ears in the saloon, Clara learned of Reno's routine. Every third day, he would ride along, looping patrol along the southern edge of the territory, a route that took him through a series of narrow, rocky canyons, a place the locals called Serpent's Mow. It was a pointless patrol, a simple excuse for him to terrorize any Apache hunters he might encounter. This routine, this arrogant predictability, would be his undoing. Cale, the young Apache scout who had joined her cause, became her indispensable partner in this new, deadlier phase of her war. He knew Serpent's Mow like the back of his own hand. He knew its secrets, its hidden paths, and its inhabitants. "There is a place," Cale told her, his voice a low, respectful whisper as they knelt over a map drawn in the dust. "A den, where the great diamondbacks sleep in the heat of the day. The trail passes less than 10 feet from the entrance. A foolish place to ride." The plan they devised was one of patient, natural horror. It required no dynamite, no grand ambush, only a deep understanding of the desert and the creatures that ruled it. The day before Reno's patrol, Clara and Cale made their way into Serpent's Mow. They carried with them a single, freshly killed jackrabbit. At the spot Cale had indicated, a deep, shaded crevice at the base of the canyon wall, they prepared their trap. They laid the scent of the rabbit's blood near the entrance to the den, a clear, irresistible invitation to the snakes within, agitating them, drawing them out. Their main work was on the trail itself. A few yards past the den, a large, precariously balanced rock formation loomed over the narrow path. Cale, with his climber's skill, scaled the rock face. He did not set a charge. He simply, carefully, chipped away at the keystone, the single, supporting rock that held the formation in a fragile state of equilibrium. He then attached a long, thin strand of nearly invisible sinew to the keystone, running it down the rock face and across the trail, hidden in the dust. It was a tripwire of terrifying simplicity. They retreated to a high hidden ledge, a place where they could watch and see. The next afternoon, Reno rode into the canyon, just as Mav had predicted. He rode with a lazy, arrogant slump in his saddle, his rifle holstered, his mind dulled by the heat and the monotony of his patrol. He was a predator who had forgotten that in the desert, everything is also prey. As his horse drew near the agitated snake den, the animal, its senses far sharper than its rider's, shied violently, whinnying in terror at the scent of the snakes. Reno, startled and angry, fought to control his mount. The horse sidestepped, its hooves stumbling directly into the hidden tripwire. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The thin, strong sinew pulled the keystone free. With a deep, groaning crack, the entire rock formation above gave way. A small avalanche of rock and scree thundered down onto the trail. It did not crush him. It was not a massive rock slide, but it was enough. The horse screamed as its legs were broken by the falling rocks. Reno was thrown violently to the ground, his own leg pinned beneath his dying mount, his head striking a rock with a sickening crack that dazed him. He was trapped, wounded, and disoriented. And he had been thrown into the heart of the now thoroughly roused snake den. Clara and Cale watched from above as the scene unfolded with a kind of grim, natural inevitability. The great diamondbacks, disturbed by the noise and the scent of blood, slithered from their den. Reno, his leg trapped, could only watch in horror, his panicked, desperate shots from his pistol going wild. The desert itself delivered the final, venomous judgment. Clara and Cale did not descend until the sun began to set, long after the last of the terrible screams had faded into the canyon silence. They found Reno's body, his face a mask of terror, his death a clear and horrifying testament to the power of the land he had so arrogantly abused. Clara knelt beside the body. She did not touch him. From a small pouch at her belt, she took her calling card, a single, perfectly preserved poppy flower. She gently placed it in the open, dead hand of the man. The message his body would send back to the vulture's talons was clear and terrifying. The desert ghost was not just a sniper or a saboteur. She was a witch, a shaman who commanded the very spirits of the desert rocks, the snakes, the earth itself to do her bidding. She was not a foe they could fight with guns. She was a curse. The Whispering Campaign had found its voice. And that voice was the final, chilling rattle of a serpent. Reno's horrifying death, and the single, impossible poppy flower left as a testament, was not a whisper, it was a thunderclap. When his body was discovered, the story that raced back to Coyote's Rest was a twisted, supernatural tale. The vultures, already on edge, were now consumed by a primal fear. They were not just fighting a person, they were fighting a ghost who had the desert's own dark magic at her command. Marcus Thorne, however, was not a superstitious man. He was a creature of logic and control, and he saw the escalating events not as a haunting, but as a coordinated, and therefore deeply threatening, insurgency. The accidents were too precise. The ghost had to have help. The town, which he had long considered a cowed and broken possession, had to be harboring his enemy. His response was swift and brutal. The pretense of being a businessman was dropped. He declared a state of martial law in the town. His men, their fear now channeled into a savage anger, became an occupying army. They ransacked homes under the guise of searching for the conspirator. They imposed a strict curfew, beating anyone caught on the streets after sundown. They seized supplies from the general store, claiming them as provisions for the town's protection. Thorne's goal was simple: to crush the town's spirit, to make the price of supporting the ghost so high that the people themselves would turn on her. But Thorne, in his arrogance, had made a critical miscalculation. His crackdown did not isolate Clara, it galvanized her support. The townspeople, who had been hesitant allies, their support given in whispers and shadows, were now faced with a stark choice: to surrender completely to Thorne's tyranny or to commit fully to the fight for their own survival. The oppression forged the disparate sparks of resistance into a single, hardened core. The chapter's focus shifts to the formal creation of this new alliance. The secret meeting takes place in the safest, most sacred place left in the town, the small, cold cellar beneath the mission. It is a council of war for a revolution that has been thrust upon them. In the flickering candlelight, the leaders of the resistance gather. There is Clara, the quiet, deadly catalyst. There is Elias, the one-eyed liveryman, his face set like granite, his presence a symbol of the town's enduring, stubborn strength. There is Mav, the saloon owner, her fiery spirit now tempered into a sharp, strategic mind. And there is Father Michael, his faith now demanding not just prayer, but action. They are joined by a new and crucial member. Cale, the young Apache scout, steps out of the shadows. He is the bridge between two worlds, his people having suffered at the hands of the vultures for years. His presence is a testament to the fact that Thorne's tyranny has united even the most bitter of historical enemies. My people know the ways of the ghost, Cale says, his voice a low, respectful murmur as he looks at Clara. We have been fighting men like Thorne for generations, not with armies, but with the land itself. Our fight is your fight. The meeting in the cellar is the heart of the chapter. It is here that they cease to be a collection of individuals and become a true council of war. They share information, they assess their strengths and weaknesses, and they formulate a plan. Clara, despite her reluctance, is their undisputed leader. Her quiet, focused intensity and her proven success have earned her their absolute trust. But she does not command like a general. She listens. She draws on the unique skills of each member. Liv, from her position in the saloon, provides the internal intelligence. She knows which of Thorne's men are the most loyal, and which are beginning to waver under the pressure. Elias, the blacksmith, becomes their quartermaster and their engineer. He knows the town's infrastructure, its weaknesses, and its hidden pathways. Father Michael offers not just the sanctuary of his church, but a network of communication, using the guise of religious services to pass messages and coordinate the town's silent resistance. And Cale, he becomes their chief scout and their master of guerrilla warfare. He and his braves will be their eyes and ears in the desert, their phantoms in the canyons. The chapter is not one of action, but of profound, character-driven tension. It is the forging of an alliance in the crucible of fear. They are a doctor's wife, a one-eyed old man, a saloon owner, a priest, and an Apache scout. They are a handful of broken, forgotten people. But as they sit in the cold, damp cellar, their faces illuminated by a single, defiant flame, they are something more. They are a promise. They are a unified, cross-cultural force, a testament to the fact that the greatest strength is often found in the places and the people you least expect. They are no longer just fighting for vengeance or survival. They are fighting for the soul of their shared home. The alliance forged in the mission's cellar demanded a new and bolder strategy. The whispering campaign of psychological terror was no longer enough. Marcus Thorne's open declaration of war on the town required a response that was not just felt, but was crippling. Clara knew they had to strike at the heart of the Vulture's Talons operation, their opium smuggling. It was the engine of their enterprise, the source of the wealth that paid for their guns and bought the silence of the law. To destroy it would be to sever the serpent's head from its body. The plan was born from the combined intelligence of their new council. Liv, from the drunken boasts she overheard in the saloon, provided the what. The Vultures were expecting a massive, consolidated shipment of raw opium from their suppliers in Mexico, the largest of the season. Cale, the Apache scout, provided the where. He knew the gang's main desertway station, a fortified oasis built around a series of natural springs, a place they called Vulture's Roost. It was their primary storehouse, a fortress in the sand where they would hold the raw product before moving it north across the border. The mission was a full-blown act of industrial sabotage, a far more complex and dangerous undertaking than any they had yet attempted. This would not be the work of a lone ghost, it would require a team. The chapter becomes a tense, high-stakes infiltration narrative. Clara leads a small, elite team handpicked for their specific skills. She is the leader and strategist. Cale is their guide, his ability to move through the desert without a sound their greatest asset. Elias, the blacksmith, his raw strength needed for the heavy work ahead, insists on coming. And they are joined by a quiet, wary miner named Hector, a man whose family had been one of the first victims of the Vultures and who possessed an intimate and deeply useful knowledge of demolitions. Their journey to Vulture's Roost is a perilous one, a 2-day ride through a stretch of the harshest desert, a place of shifting sands and treacherous, rocky terrain. They travel by night, resting during the blistering heat of the day, their movements a silent, disciplined procession. Vulture's Roost is everything Cale had described: a small, ugly fortress of adobe and timber, manned by a dozen of Thorne's most trusted guards. A direct assault would be a massacre. Their plan, once again, was not to fight the men, but to destroy their purpose for being there. They scouted the way station for a full day from a distant, shimmering mesa, mapping the guards' routines, the layout of the buildings, and the location of their primary targets, the large, leather-bound sacks of raw opium stored in the main warehouse, and the oasis's central well, the only source of fresh water for miles. The raid takes place on the second night, under the cover of a moonless, starless sky. The operation is a masterpiece of silent, coordinated action. Cale is the first to move, a phantom in the darkness. He uses a silent Apache bow to take out the 2 sentries on the perimeter, their death's quiet thuds in the night. With the perimeter breached, the team splits. Elias and Hector move toward the warehouse. Their job is not to burn it if fire would be too loud, too obvious. Instead, they use their strength and tools to pry open the back wall, gaining silent access to the opium sacks. Meanwhile, Clara and Cale move toward the well. This is the heart of their plan. Clara, using her medical and botanical knowledge, has prepared a potent, concentrated concoction. It is a mixture of several desert plants, including a powerful hallucinogen and a fast-acting emetic. It is not designed to be lethal, but to be utterly, catastrophically contaminating. The scene at the well is one of pure, nerve-shredding tension. As Cale stands guard, a silent, deadly shadow, Clara works. She uncovers the well and pours her serpent's remedy into the deep, clear water, the dark liquid dissolving into the lifeblood of the entire outpost. At the same time, in the warehouse, Elias and Hector are working with a grim efficiency. They do not destroy the opium. They contaminate it. They slice open the sacks and pour in a fine, gritty sand mixed with a foul-smelling animal musk, a mixture that will render the entire shipment utterly worthless and unsellable. Their work is nearly complete when a single guard, making an unscheduled round, stumbles upon Elias and Hector. A brief, brutal, and silent fight ensues. Elias, using his raw, blacksmith strength, manages to subdue the man without a sound, but not before Hector receives a deep slash to his arm from the guard's knife. They retreat back into the desert just as the first rays of dawn are beginning to touch the horizon, their mission a stunning success, but a success that has come at a cost. The aftermath, which they learn of days later from Lev, is exactly as they had planned. The guards at Vulture's Roost awaken to find their water undrinkable, their men sick and hallucinating, and their multi-thousand-dollar opium shipment a worthless, stinking mess. The financial blow to Thorne's operation is catastrophic. His entire smuggling pipeline is crippled. But the chapter ends on a somber, ominous note. Hector's wand, despite Clara's best efforts, is becoming infected. Their victory has been immense, but it has also brought the reality of their dangerous war home in the most personal way. And they all know that a man like Marcus Thorne, his finances now crippled and his back against the wall, will not respond with retreat. He will respond with a final, all-out, and far more terrifying wave of violence. The ghost has not just wounded the serpent, she has cornered it. And a cornered serpent is the deadliest of all. The news of the disaster at Vulture's Roost struck Marcus Thorne not like a business loss, but like a personal, physical blow. The quiet, invisible war of attrition had escalated into a catastrophic financial wound. His authority was a joke. His men were terrified of a ghost who could poison their wells and turn their profits to dust, and his entire smuggling empire was on the brink of collapse. Thorne, a man who had always seen himself as a predator, a wolf among sheep, finally acknowledged the terrifying truth. He was being outhunted. His response was born of pure, cold-blooded desperation. He knew his own thugs, brutal as they were no match for this phantom. He needed a different kind of animal. He needed a wolf who could hunt a wolf. He sent a wire to a man whose name was a legend in the darker corners of the territory, a name spoken in hushed, fearful tones by marshals and outlaws alike. He sent for Silas Kane. Kane was not a gunfighter in the traditional sense. He was a man-tracker, a human bloodhound. He was a gaunt, skeletal figure who was said to be half Apache himself, a man who could read a trail on solid rock and smell a man's fear on the wind. He worked for no gang, held no allegiance but to the highest bidder, and he had never, ever lost a quarry. He was a relentless, unstoppable force of nature, and his price was astronomical. Thorne paid it without hesitation. The arrival of Silas Kane in Coyote's Rest was a silent, chilling event. He did not ride in with a posse. He arrived alone, on a tough, weary Mustang, looking like little more than a sun-scorched prospector. But the moment he dismounted, a palpable sense of dread settled over the town. The Vultures, who had feared Clara's ghost, were utterly terrified of this man. He was a different kind of magic, a darker and more ancient power. For the first time since her return, Clara Gray was not the hunter. She was the hunted. The chapter becomes a tense, high-stakes pursuit across the vast and forgiving landscape of the New Mexico Badlands. Kane did not begin his hunt in the town. He began at the beginning. He rode out to the ruins of the Gray family's general store. He spent a full day there, a silent and moving figure, reading the ashes, the very earth itself, as if it were a book. He was not just looking for tracks, he was getting to know the soul of his enemy. He then moved to the side of each of Clara's attacks, canyon of the snake trap, the site of the rock slide that had stopped the opium shipment. He was a master tracker, and he began to piece together the story of the ghost, to understand her methods, her intelligence, her way of thinking. Clara, warned of his arrival by a panic message from Elias, was forced to abandon her familiar territory. She knew her hidden camps, her secret pots, were no longer safe. She was forced out into the open desert, the one place where she had always felt at home, but which now felt like a closing trap. The pursuit is a deadly chess match, a battle of wits and endurance between two master survivors. Clara uses every trick she has learned to cover her trail. She rides through rocky, windswept plains where tracks are impossible to follow. She uses the blistering midday sun to her advantage, knowing it will test the limits of Kane's horse and his water supply. She sets false trails, decoys designed to lead him into dead-end canyons. But Kane is her equal. He is relentless, seemingly immune to the hardships of the desert. He anticipates her moves, he sees through her deceptions. He is not just following her tracks, he seems to be following her very thoughts. He leaves his own chilling calling cards for her to find a single black crow's feather placed on a rock where he knows she will pass, a sign that he is not just behind her, but is all around her. The psychological toll on Clara is immense. She is isolated, constantly moving, deprived of sleep. The hunter has become the prey, and the feeling of being relentlessly stalked, of being the object of a cold, dispassionate hunt, begins to wear on her iron will. The pursuit culminates in a tense, dramatic standoff during a sudden, violent sandstorm. The world is reduced to a swirling, blinding chaos of red dust and screaming wind. Clara, believing she has finally found a chance to lose him, takes refuge in a small, shallow cave. But as the storm rages, a figure emerges from the blinding dust at the mouth of the cave. It is Cain. He is not holding a gun. He is simply standing there, a gaunt, skeletal silhouette, his eyes, even in the gloom, seeming to glow with a terrifying, predatory light. "You are good, ghost girl," his voice rasps, a sound like sand scraping on rock. "Very good. But you cannot run from what you are." "And one? I am what you are." He does not attack. He simply stands there, a promise of her own inevitable capture. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he melts back into the storm, leaving Clara alone, her heart pounding, her confidence shattered. She has finally met an enemy she may not be able to defeat. She has survived the confrontation, but she knows, with a cold, terrifying certainty, that she has not escaped. Clara returned from the desert a different woman. The encounter with Silas Cain had shaken her to her core. She had survived, but the psychological scars of being hunted by a master had left their mark. She realized, with a grim clarity, that she could not win a defensive war against a man like Cain forever. Sooner or later, he would find her. Sooner or later, he would corner her. To survive, she had to stop running. She had to reclaim the terrain. She had to take back the town. Her focus shifted from the external threat of Cain to the internal rot that still festered in Coyote's Rest, Sheriff Brody. He was the symbol of the town's compromised law, the broken cog that allowed Thorne's machine to function. Clara had ignored him, seeing him as a pathetic, irrelevant coward. But she now understood that his cowardice was a strategic weakness she could exploit. She did not want to kill him. She wanted to own him. Her plan was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, designed to force the sheriff to make an impossible choice. With the help of her allies, she began to set the stage. Cale, the Apache scout, began to leak information to some of the town's more notorious gossips. The information was a carefully crafted lie. The desert ghost, terrified of the new manhunter, was planning one last, desperate act. She was going to ambush a small, vulnerable opium shipment that was due to pass south of the town. The lie was designed to be believed, to be passed on, and to eventually reach the ears of Sheriff Brody. At the same time, Elias and Maev began to apply a different kind of pressure. They orchestrated a series of small, public confrontations with the sheriff. Maev would refuse to serve him at the saloon, citing a no cowards policy. Elias would accidentally misplace the shoes for the sheriff's horse, grounding him. They were small, humiliating acts, designed to isolate him, to remind him of his own impotence and the town's growing contempt for him. Sheriff Brody, already a man living on a knife's edge of fear, began to unravel. He was caught between a town that despised him, a ruthless boss who was losing patience, and now, the terrifying presence of the silent, watchful Silas Cain. As Clara had predicted, the rumor of the final ambush reached him. And, as she had also predicted, he did what he had always done. He passed the information on to Marcus Thorne. This was the moment the trap was sprung. Clara was not interested in the opium shipment. Her target was the sheriff himself. She and her allies did not go to the location of the fake ambush. Instead, they set their own trap on the trail leading back to town. They knew that Thorne, upon hearing the news, would send a group of his vultures, likely with the sheriff leading them, to intercept the ghost. The scene plays out as a tense, dramatic confrontation. Sheriff Brody, forced to ride at the head of a small posse of vultures, leads them into a narrow canyon. Suddenly, a rock slide, carefully prepared by Hector the miner, blocks the trail behind them. They are trapped. From the rocks above, Clara and her allies appear, their rifles leveled. But they are not aiming at the vultures. They are all aiming at Sheriff Brody. "It seems you have a choice to make, Sheriff," Clara's voice calls out, clear and cold. At that moment, from the other end of the canyon, a second group of riders appears, led by Kao. The vultures are caught in a perfect pincer movement. Then, Clara plays her final card. She reveals that the opium shipment was a ghost, a lie. There was never any shipment. The entire operation was a setup, designed to expose the sheriff's treachery. The vultures, realizing they have been led into a death trap by a man who was feeding them false information, turn on the sheriff, their faces masks of snarling, betrayed fury. Sheriff Brody is now caught in an impossible position. In front of him is the ghost and her army of rebels, their guns aimed at him. Behind him are the killers he serves, who now believe he is a traitor. His life is forfeit, no matter which way he turns. I told you there was a choice, Sheriff. Clara's voice echoes in the canyon. You can die here today, with them. Or, you can live. And you can start upholding the law you swore an oath to protect. You can become our man on the inside. Your choice. Faced with his own certain, immediate mortality, the sheriff's lifetime of cowardice finally gives way to a single, desperate act of self-preservation. He draws his pistol, but he does not fire at Clara. He turns and fires at the vulture standing next to him. The canyon erupts in a brief, brutal firefight, with the sheriff now fighting alongside the rebels. When the dust settles, the vultures are dead, and Sheriff Brody, his face a mask of sweat and terror, has made his choice. He is no longer Thorne's pawn. He is now, reluctantly and with a gun to his head, Clara Gray's agent. She has not just defeated a posse, she has captured the law itself. The conversion of Sheriff Brody was not a victory that could be celebrated with cheers. It was a cold, pragmatic acquisition, a chess piece captured in a deadly game. Clara now had a pair of unwilling eyes and ears inside the enemy's camp, but she knew his loyalty was a currency minted from fear, a currency that could be devalued at any moment. The larger, more menacing piece on the board was still Silas Kane, the manhunter, whose silence was more terrifying than any of Thorne's loud threats. The town of Coyote's Rest was now a powder keg, there thick with an unspoken civil war. Thorne and his remaining vultures were an occupying army, their paranoia making them more brutal than ever. The townspeople, emboldened by the rebels' successes but terrified of Kane's presence, were a volatile sea of whispered conspiracies and simmering resentment. This chapter focuses on the intense, psychological warfare that now defined the conflict. It is a story of shifting allegiances and the terrible price of resistance. Silas Kane, a master of this kind of warfare, understood that to find a ghost, you must first drain the sea it swims in. He began to systematically target Clara's support structure, not with overt violence, but with a subtle, insidious cruelty. His first target was the mission, the sanctuary that Father Michael had provided. Kane did not burn the church. He desecrated it. In the dead of night, his men, likely not the vultures but other, quieter assets, broke into the small adobe building. They did not steal the silver chalice or the collection box. They overturned the altar, they tore pages from the Bible, and on the main wall, above the pulpit, they painted the vulture's emblem claw clutching the poppy in pig's blood. It was an act of profound psychological violation, designed to tell the town that nothing was sacred, that even God's house could not protect them. Father Michael, his faith shaken but his resolve hardened, refused to close the church. The act, intended to terrorize, instead became a symbol of the town's defiance, the desecrated altar a rallying point for their quiet, desperate prayers. Kane's next target was Mev. He couldn't prove she was a spy, so he sought to ruin her. A dispute over the ownership of the Gilded Poppy Saloon was suddenly discovered. A man with a forged deed, backed by Thorne, appeared and claimed the saloon as his own. Sheriff Brody, in his first, agonizing test as a double agent, was forced to legally enforce the claim. Mev was thrown out of her own home, her livelihood stripped away. The message was clear: anyone who supported the ghost would be systematically erased from the town's life. The pressure on Clara's small alliance was immense. Hector, the miner wounded in the raid on Vulture's Roost, was still weak, his slow recovery a constant, grim reminder of the physical cost of their fight. The townspeople, seeing the escalating brutality, began to waver. Their support, once a rising tide, was now beginning to ebb, their fear of Kane's silent, methodical cruelty overwhelming their hope. The emotional core of the chapter is a confrontation between Clara and a delegation of the townsfolk, led by the blacksmith. "We believe in you, Clara," the blacksmith says, his voice heavy with a new, weary desperation. "But we are not warriors. Our children are going hungry. Maeve has lost everything. We cannot win a war against a devil like Cain." Clara is faced with the terrible weight of her leadership. Her personal quest for vengeance has ignited a fire that now threatens to consume the very people she sought to protect. She is forced to question her own methods, to wonder if the price of her justice is too high. It is during this crisis of faith that her most unlikely ally, Sheriff Brody, provides her with the key. In a secret, terrified meeting, he gives her the information that will change the course of the war. Cain is getting impatient, Brody whispers, his hands trembling. He's convinced you have a main base of operations, a hidden camp somewhere in the hills where you're training a secret army. He reveals that Thorne, under Cain's direction, is planning a massive, final sweep of the entire territory. They will use a large posse, guided by Cain himself, to comb every canyon and every cave. They will not stop until they have found and exterminated her and anyone with her. But then he provides the critical piece of intelligence. To do this, Thorne has to consolidate all his remaining men, Brody says. He's pulling every guard, even from his most important asset. The big opium shipment, the one you sabotaged at the Roost, has been reprocessed. It's not perfect, but it's sellable. It's his last chance to recoup his losses. For one night, the entire shipment will be stored, under a skeleton crew, in the warehouse at Skull Ridge before it moves out. He's choosing to protect his men over his product. He thinks you're a guerrilla fighter, not a thief. Clara sees it instantly. It is not a problem, it is an opportunity. A final, desperate gamble. Thorne and Cain are about to launch a massive hunt for a ghost army that doesn't exist. And in doing so, they are leaving the very heart of their empire, their last great treasure, almost completely unguarded. The chapter ends with Clara making a decision. She will not wait for Cain's army to come to her. She will not fight a defensive war. She will take the last of her allies, her small, battered band of rebels, and she will do the one thing her enemies do not expect. She will go on the attack. She will go to Skull Ridge. The price of a poppy had been the town's suffering. Now, the price of a poppy would be Thorne's complete and utter destruction. The night air at Skull Ridge was cold and thin, the moon a sliver of bone in a black, star-dusted sky. The canyon was a place of natural dread, its walls carved by the wind into shapes that looked like leering skulls, a fitting final battleground for the soul of Coyote's Rest. The warehouse, a squat, ugly building of stone and timber, sat in the heart of the canyon like a black, waiting heart. Inside was Marcus Thorne's last hope, a fortune in processed opium, the culmination of his entire criminal enterprise. This was Clara Gray's ultimate gamble. While Silas Cain and the bulk of the vultures were preparing for their grand, ghost hunting sweep of the desert, Clara and her small, desperate army were moving to cut the serpent's head off. Her army was a collection of the town's broken but unbowed. There was Elias, the one-eyed liveryman, his face grim, his shotgun held with a steady, familiar grip. There was Maeve, her fiery hair hidden under a hat, her grief for her lost saloon now a cold, hard diamond of rage. There was Cale, the Apache scout, a silent phantom who moved as if he were a part of the night itself. And there were a half-dozen other miners and ranchers, armed with old rifles, pistols, and a courage born of having nothing left to lose. The chapter is a masterpiece of tactical, guerrilla warfare. Clara's plan is not a frontal assault, it is a surgical strike, designed to use their small numbers and superior knowledge of the terrain to maximum effect. The battle begins not with a bang, but with a whisper. Cale and two of his Apache braves, moving with supernatural silence, neutralize the sentries on the canyon's rim. They are ghosts, their arrows silent, deadly messengers in the dark. With the high ground secured, the main assault begins. It is a coordinated, multi-pronged attack. Elias and the miners, under Clara's direction, use a small, precisely placed dynamite charge, a skill learned from Hector's lessons, to blow the main gate of the warehouse compound off its hinges. The explosion is the signal, a deafening roar that shatters the canyon's silence and announces that the reckoning has begun. As the handful of vulture guards inside rush toward the main gate, a second force, led by Maeve, attacks from the rear, setting a diversionary fire in the stables, creating chaos and confusion. The canyon erupts into a hell of smoke, fire, and the echoing crack of gunfire. The vultures, a skeleton crew of no more than 15 men, are caught completely off guard, their numbers and their fortified position rendered useless by the chaos and the multi-directional attack. In the heart of this maelstrom is Clara. She is no longer just a strategist or a ghost. She is a true warrior, a field commander. She moves through the battle, a blur of motion, her twin Colts dispensing a cold, efficient justice. Her objective is singular, Marcus Thorne. She finds him not cowering in the back, but making a desperate last stand near the main warehouse doors, a shotgun in his hands, his face a mask of snarling, cornered animal fury. Their final confrontation is not a classic, high-noon duel. It is a brutal, close-quarters brawl in the flickering, hellish light of the burning stables. It is a desperate, personal battle for justice, fought amidst the chaos of the larger fight. Thorne is stronger, but Clara is faster, more skilled, and fueled by a righteous fire that has been burning for 5 long years. The fight is a whirlwind of dodge blasts, of pistols fired at point-blank range, of a desperate struggle for control. It ends with both of them wounded, their guns empty. Thorne lunges, his hands reaching for her throat. Clara, in a final, desperate move, draws the long, wicked-looking skinning knife from her boot, a tool of survival, now an instrument of vengeance. The fight ends in a moment of grim, final silence. Marcus Thorne, the tyrant of Coyote's Rest, falls to the dust, his own surprised face illuminated by the flames of his burning empire. As their leader falls, the last of the vultures' resistance crumbles. The battle for Skull Ridge is over. The rebels, battered and bleeding, but victorious, have won. The sun that rose over Skull Ridge the next morning illuminated a scene of quiet, grim finality. The fire in the stables had burned itself out. The bodies of the fallen, both vulture and rebel, lay in the silent embrace of the canyon. The vulture's talons, as a force of power and terror, were gone, their empire shattered in a single night of fire and retribution. The victorious rebels were not a cheering army. They were a small, somber group of survivors, their victory tempered by the loss of friends, the cost of their freedom etched onto their smoke-stained faces. They looked to Clara, their leader, their avenging angel. In their eyes was a question: what now? They had won the war, but how to build the peace? But Clara knew her work was done. She had not fought to become a leader or a lawwoman. She had fought to avenge her family and to give the people of Coyote's Rest a chance to reclaim their own lives. That chance had been earned, paid for in blood and courage. Their future was now in their own hands. As the group tended to their wounded and prepared to bring their fallen comrades home, a lone rider appeared on the canyon rim. It was Silas Kane, the manhunter, drawn by the smoke and the silence. He had arrived too late. The ghost he had been hunting had already won the war. He and Clara faced each other across the battlefield, 100 yards of silent, dusty ground between them. There was no challenge, no threat, only a quiet, profound acknowledgement between two masters of the same deadly game. Kane gave a slow, single-noted gesture of respect, of concession. Then, he turned his horse and rode away, a phantom disappearing back into the desert, his contract nullified by the finality of death. Clara, too, knew it was time for her to disappear. The final scene of the story is not a celebration in a liberated town. It is a quiet farewell in the canyons that had become her sanctuary. She speaks with Elias and Moev, the two pillars of her rebellion. The town will need leaders, she says, her voice a soft, weary whisper. It will need builders. I am neither of those things. I am a ghost, and my work here is done. They plead with her to stay, to be a part of the new life she has made possible. But she shakes her head, a sad, final smile on her face. Her war is over, but the peace she has won for them is not a peace she can share. The scars she carries, both visible and invisible, are too deep. She does not ride back to Coyote's Rest. She gives her share of the captured money to Elias to help rebuild the town. She keeps only enough for a new horse and supplies. Then, she mounts up. The last images of Clara Gray, a solitary figure on horseback, at the edge of the vast and forgiving desert that had forged her. She looks back, one last time, at the distant smudge of smoke that is the town she has saved. Then she turns her face toward the endless, open horizon and rides on, not as a fugitive and not as a hero, but simply as a survivor. She disappears into the heat haze, a whisper on the wind, leaving behind a town that has learned a hard and valuable lesson, and a new legend for the territory. A legend that would be told for years to come. A story of a quiet nurse who had become a warrior. A testament to the idea that vengeance is not loud, it is the whisper that haunts the night, and the shadow that never fades.